This video is a little bit of a shorter one, just to have a quick look at the problems with how Crystal Palace set up defensively against Liverpool on Saturday. In particular, why their mid-block wasn't effective in stopping Liverpool. So, in possession Liverpool looked to progress up the pitch in what was pretty much a 4-3-3 but sometimes resembled a 4-1-5. Trent Alexander-Arnold had his usual free role which Onslaught has used him in this season. He often started out wide in these traditional right-back areas, outside of the Palace block, but would happily drift into different zones of the pitch. Sometimes alongside Gravenberch in the pivot or higher up on the right as Salah was positioned narrow, dragging in Mitchell with him. He could operate in all of this space here. Tsimikas would stay narrow and deep early on, almost forming a back three for Liverpool, but would constantly provide over or underlaps for Gakpo on the left-hand side. So with this in mind, let's have a look at what Crystal Palace's mid-block looked like. They tried to keep to a 5-2-3 shape with the intention of blocking off any progression through the centre for Liverpool. Onslaught favours building up narrow and through central areas, so this seemed to be a solid setup on paper, but it failed. The first problem was the dilemma that was caused by Trent. This is because, if Eze stuck to what his normal role you would expect to be in this shape, and pressed Konate, then an easy out ball to Trent is on, and leaving him with space and time in this area is only going to cause trouble. And if Eze was drawn out to Trent, then the idea of keeping compact is out of the window, as Konate can take his pick of passes through the lines. Oliver Glasner tried to solve this by having one of his pivot players push up and put pressure on the centre-backs. This in principle works, but for Palace it did not. And this leads us on to the main issue for Palace at the weekend, which was the massive lack of intensity when defending from the players. One pattern which emerged was this. One of the pivots jumped to pressurise the centre-back for Liverpool, while the other moved on to Gravenberch. Nketiah is ready to press the other centre-back, so in theory, the player should have no real passing options. However, what was happening behind this was the issue. When one of Liverpool's eights dropped and moved so he could receive a pass, he was not at all followed by the Palace back five. Meaning he could pick up the ball and look to turn at the back line of Palace. This situation, which looked like Liverpool would lose possession, has easily turned into a situation which looks like they are about to score. Adding on to this, even on the occasion where they were followed, the defender didn't try to stop them turning or try winning the ball as soon as it was coming into their feet. Instead, just standing off and almost waiting for them to do something with the ball. This meant they could even play what should be risky passes into Gravenberch, and he would turn and play through the lines with no aggressive, tenacious challenge from the opposition. All of this led to Liverpool managing to play through Crystal Palace with ease, and get into promising positions to create chances in far too often. It should be mentioned that this is uncharacteristic of a Glasner team, as they are normally so well drilled when out of possession, but the players, I would say other than Luma, weren't tenacious enough to win a game against a team like Liverpool. So for me the blame for this particular performance doesn't lie at the feet of Oliver Glasner. Another consistent problem for Palace was the role of Tsimikas for Liverpool. When the ball was in more advanced positions, Tsimikas always offered support. This often drew Lacroix over from his more central position, meaning a big gap was left, which McAllister often exploited. This was also the case with Diogo Jota too. He could drift wide, catching the eye of Lacroix, which again left a space between himself and Guéhi. Finally, when Crystal Palace did eventually win the ball, Liverpool were extremely vulnerable if they were to be countered, as they only really had these three players back most of the time. But due to the fact Palace were sloppy in possession and their own really solid counter-press, they weren't really able to hurt them in the first half. But this did change slightly in the second half, as Palace did look more threatening in transition. So as I've said, I don't personally think this performance was on Glasner, and I actually think his plan was really solid. But this wasn't executed well as a team, and ultimately cost Crystal Palace the game.